Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
Superior Court of California, County of Los Angeles, in the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097211. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty.
We take a suspect to trial, his attorney will have a field day and won't be left holding our dicks. Like those LAPD dicks after the OJ trial.
You know what? Go fuck yourself.
Come again?
Crisco oiled piece of shit. You fucking heard me.
Are you serious?
Those LAPD dicks got royally fucked because they had the audacity to pin the murder on a guilty man, a man lucky enough to be charged after Rodney King. So Cochran could just hint that they were racist.
Everybody heard the Furman tape.
I'm talking about solid guys, lifetime fucking guys who had their retirement fucking ruined. Why? Because they had the balls to do their fucking job. And here you are, you gutless fucking wonder. We'll talk about cops. You will never, in your career, do the cop work they did on a fucking lunch break. One more thing. Fuck Furman. You remind me of him. And fuck this fucking city.
A new audio recording is raising questions about what the LAPD knew and when. It reportedly features this man, Detective Frank Liga, disparaging fellow officers and public figures at a training session.
His teaching position has been taken away from him, and the removal from the field, I think, is recent.
Do you regret shooting him? I says, no, I regret that he's alone in the truck at the time. I could have killed a whole truckload of them and would have been happily doing so.
That is believed to be narcotics detective Frank Liga talking about the night in 1997 when he shot and killed fellow officer Kevin Gaines. Both men were in plain clothes and the LAPD ruled it self-defense. The department settled with Gaines' family for $250,000, but the case was the beginning of the Rampart scandal.
Cali, great place to visit. I'm going back to Cali. 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 I'm going back to Cali.
People, I just want to say, can we all get along? Can we get along? Can we stop making it horrible for the older people and the kids? And I mean, we've got enough smog here in Los Angeles.
Context of white supremacy, connecting dots. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Monday, July 5, 2021. So I have been told. I hope everybody made it through the weekend safely. You have as many fingers as you did before Friday, when all of the wackiness began. Didn't have to make any unplanned hospital visits or anything else. I told someone that yesterday, they said, "Are you celebrating? Are you having a good 4th?" I said, what's wrong with that? I said, explosives, alcohol, bad combination. He said, "Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. That's one. Two, if it means anything, I'm enjoying the air conditioning here in Seattle at the University Starbucks. This is apparently the second Starbucks ever location is almost 50 years old. How about that? I knew Starbucks was founded in Seattle, but I never thought it was that important to go track down where's the first Starbucks. I still don't know where that is, but I do know. Number 2, U Village. Anyway, our broadcast for today, reading is more important than watching television. The entire reason we're doing this broadcast today is because of the book club. So let me walk it back, straight line, and I can straight line connect the dots to pretty much everything that you just heard in the opening audio segment. So way back what seems like an eternity ago, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Jeffrey Toobin got in trouble for his antics on Zoom. Inappropriate sexual conduct, got fired from the New Yorker. I guess he got a vacation from CNN, but now he's back. So we read the run of his life, The People versus O.J. Simpson. I thought O.J. was guilty, even though I didn't watch the trial. I hadn't researched anything or, anything. Just everybody said he was guilty, so he had to be guilty. We read the book, changed my mind about everything, and wow, racism, white supremacy in so many layers. So as we were getting through that, I said, man, we should read a little bit more on Johnnie Cochran. So our follow-up book, Jack Olson, Last Man Standing, The Tragedy and Triumph of Geronimo Gijaga Pratt. Lots more about Johnnie Cochran as a litigator, legendary litigator, attempted counter-racist, Los Angeles, LAPD, the LA Prosecutor's Office, Gil Garcetti, lots of the same people, same city, same racism in many levels. And the Geronimo Pratt case, because he was in greater confinement for so long, 27 years, his case went all the way through the O.J. Simpson trial. So that case takes place, and even while it's happening, some people are saying, hey, forget O.J., Geronimo Pratt, Geronimo Pratt. So this goes all the way through that. So we get to 1997. People who've listened to the cows, you've heard Dr. Frances Cress Welsing on this broadcast many times. 31 times she was a guest over the years. She would use the phrase, connect the dots. So just our third book, we finished Geronimo Pratt, the book that we're reading right now, that we just started. The only reason that we're reading this book, again, O.J. Simpson, then Geronimo Pratt. I said, man, when we were reading O.J. Simpson, I said the master class on this would have to be like the 1990s Los Angeles racism and policing would be like a study of Rodney King, the aftermath, trial, all of that, the O.J. Simpson arrest, trial coverage, all of that, Rampart, the assassination of Notorious B.I.G., Tupac Shakur, the Rampart scandal. Like, you would have to put all of that together to say, oh, wow, is all of that connected? And if so, how? That's what basically we have done on the book club for 2021, which is how we ended up here. Now, to drill down specifically to get to our guest for today, like, whew, connecting the dots. I was alive at the time of some of these events, but did not connect everything to say, now, wow, for all of this to happen in one city, and for some of these things, let's just get to it. So, Rodney King beaten, March 1991. 4 officers in Simi Valley, not guilty, April 1992. Orenthal James Simpson. This is just kind of quick overview, kind of glossing over the Christopher Commission report, which was important. O.J. Simpson is arrested June 1994. He is acquitted October 1995. Man, you talk about our timing on the book club has been out of this world. Bill Cosby was released from prison last Wednesday. Our book club on Thursday, out of the blue, they mentioned they didn't bring in the Major Crimes Division immediately after Christopher Wallace, Notorious B.I.G., was assassinated because Ennis Cosby was murdered in January 1997, and they had so much attention focused there. Cowbell as well. That murder is January 97. March 9, 1997, Christopher Wallace is murdered. 9 days later, black LAPD officer Kevin Gaines is murdered by white LAPD officer Frank Liga. And they just say, oh, Kevin Gaines, another black gangbanger. Tupac, Biggie, Kevin Gaines, nigger gangbangers, all the same thing. Moving on. All of this happens at the same time, and then Geronimo Pratt is released in June of 1997. For all of this to happen in the same city, in the same decade, with the same police department, a lot of these you'll hear the same names for some of these cases being repeated over and over. Johnny Cochran is a big one. Gil Garcetti is a big one. Wow. Context is everything. I can't say it enough. Context is everything. And I'd say generally if they can fool you on one, they might be able to get you on all of them. If they can fool you on the O.J. Simpson one, might be able to get you on all of them. You start to have questions about what happened in O.J. Simpson. Wow, you might start to have questions about all of those events. Our guest for today's broadcast, context, happened to be an enforcement officer right in the middle of all of those events. Not just an enforcement officer, LAPD enforcement officer in the midst of all of these. In fact, so close that I think he wrote that he might have even been asked to guard O.J. Simpson's house in the midst of all of this. I didn't even know about his work until we started reading Labyrinth, Randall Sullivan's book, and then we heard a little snippet from the film City of Lies, film adaptation of that book. Maybe we'll see what he thinks about that, get some of his experiences on the force, if he had any time with Frank Liga, his thoughts on how the O.J. Simpson trial and the riots and the beating of Rodney King impacted policing in the city of Los Angeles. We're so happy to have him spend a little time with us today. Joining us live, our guest, Mr. Brian S. Bentley. Mr. Bentley, are you with us, sir?
I am with you all the way. How are you doing today?
Right poorly. I will tell you, I'm super envious. I am at the second Starbucks ever. Next door, they have fresh-made ginger beer floats. I'm disgusted. Like, I had my jaw on the ground. Like, what? I'd never even seen such a thing. And white people having a blast enjoying their summer. But I'm so thankful we could have you here. Maybe I can get one of those after we finish our great program. So thankful we could have you on the broadcast. For listeners, I'm sure we have folks, this is their first time hearing about you and your great work. Anything that you would like them to hear about your experience before we get more deep into your work with LAPD?
Well, you were right on the money when you said that I was in the middle of everything that you mentioned. I started on the police department in 1989. My first assignment was West LA Division, which is the division that O.J. Simpson was in. I stayed there for a year, and I transferred to Southwest Division, which is in South Central LA. So I had experience working on both sides of town. And then when the O.J. Simpson murder case took place, during the civil trial, I was reassigned to be posted in front of his house. And so I saw him every day during the civil trial and had long conversations with him. And it was just, I don't know if it's by fate or by coincidence, but all the things that you mentioned, the Rodney King beating, the riots, Detective Frank Liga, the Biggie Smalls, I knew people that were involved in all that. The officer in question who they think killed Biggie was a close friend of mine. So, I mean, just like you said, you connect the dots. It's a coincidence or by fate, but I'm eager to talk to you guys about it.
We are eager to hear. For folks who haven't seen you or seen some of your books or seen some of your many interviews, you are a black male. Is that correct, Mr. Bentley?
I'm a black male. I grew up in L.A. I'm one of the few black officers, few LAPD officers, period, who patrolled the division where I lived. Most officers live far out in the suburbs, but I lived in L.A. and I patrolled my division. I lived in my division, and I grew up in L.A. All my family is just about here. And, I'm a black male. Went to a local high school, Westchester High School, and then went to Cal State L.A.
Right on. You make a point of that in the book of wanting to be a police officer so you could police in the hood. As you say in one time, the story of a South Central Los Angeles police officer. We'll talk about that as well. This program, The Cows, I have unfortunately concluded that what connects the dots, at least in my view, with all of these cases, Rodney King, O.J. Simpson, Kevin Gaines, and Ennis Cosby, what connects all of these cases? The system of white supremacy. And I use the term racism, white supremacy as synonyms. I use the same definition for both terms. The definition I use is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think such a system exists? Do you think that definition is accurate?
Well, I definitely think that system exists. And I know from my experience as a police officer, it's definitely that thought of white supremacy. When I was a rookie, my first day out of the academy, my training officer, who was white, he looked at me square in the eye, and he said, "Look, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not here to train you. I'm here to get you fired, because I believe that all blacks, Hispanics, women, they're only on the job because of affirmative action, and they don't belong here. They shouldn't be police officers." And so that was my first experience with it, just right out. Actually, that wasn't my first, but that was the major one from the police department, where I knew that what my role is and what their role is, where it was established.
Well, personal anecdote to punctuate the answer. Incidentally, I'm going a little bit out of order, but it's just because you gave such a colorful response there. Hey, I'm here to get you out of here. I'm going to keep it real. I'm not here to train you correctly. I'm here to get you fired. I hate affirmative action and all of you Negroes coming through here saying you want a badge. Forget all that. That sounds so familiar. In fact, I learned so much. I'm so glad that at this point in my life I read about O.J. Simpson. I had no idea. I knew Mark Fuhrman, but I didn't really know about Mark Fuhrman. When we went back and read Jeffrey Toobin's book, and then I watched the trial and heard the late F. Lee Bailey. We got one of the last interviews before F. Lee Bailey died. He was on the program right after Christmas and then passed away a few weeks ago. Our timing. When I heard F. Lee Bailey question Mark Fuhrman on the witness stand way before, did you say nigger and all of that? What is your academic background? And Mark Fuhrman said he did not graduate high school. Mark Fuhrman said he got a GED. Mark Fuhrman said that he went to not one, not two, but 3 different community colleges, did not graduate and nary a one, and said that he got approximately 2 years worth of credit. Mark, I started nicknaming him Mark GED Fuhrman for the rest of the book club after I got that information. And it made me feel really bad for reasons that are in the archives. But I mean, and then what bring all the way back, Mark Fuhrman could have been your trainer. Unless I've been misinformed, he also was furious. We got all these affirmative action hires, and they shouldn't be here, and they're unqualified and incompetent. Did you know Mark Fuhrman being the academic brilliant Mark Furman with the GED. Did you know about all that? And then him having a problem also with these affirmative action hires?
Mark Furman was a homicide when I was at West LA. My very first homicide scene that I went to when I was a rookie, he was the detective in charge. A woman that was murdered inside of a RV, and the RV was real short, small RV, and it was hot, and it was during the summer. And so he had told my training officer, he goes, "Let me borrow your rookie." And so he told me to stand in that RV. It was probably like 90 degrees. The body had been there for a couple of days. He told me, he said, stand there and watch the body and make sure it doesn't move. And if it moves, I want you to shoot it. And he told my training officer, and they set their watch, and they said, let's see how long he stands in there. Let's see how long he can take it. And so, that was my first experience with him. And then afterwards, I talked to some other officers who were veterans, and I told them what had happened. And they said, well, that guy's racist, and he's an asshole. And these were white officers that told me that, not black officers. These were white officers, older white officers that said, Mark Furman, he's a racist. He's a redneck. That's what they do. You got to watch out for people like him. And so I was warned about him when I was a rookie. As far as the education you referenced that, LAPD is looking for. I mean, you're not going to find people with PhDs and a lot of people with degrees that want to be police officers. And the department doesn't want those type of people either, because when you go to college, college teaches you to question authority and ask questions and, philosophize about all kind of stuff. So they don't want that. They want people who come from the military who follow orders. Even if the orders are wrong, they just want people who follow orders and follow the chain of command and not ask questions and not try to figure out another way of doing things.
Brian S. Bentley. Wow, so many colorful anecdotes. Mark, why am I not surprised to hear that anybody, someone classified as white, someone classified as not white, would say, whoa, you better watch out for that Furman guy. That guy is a racist. Be careful. Why am I not surprised to hear that? I guess to the second component, now I am surprised to hear that because I've heard a lot of rhetoric, propaganda maybe, saying that, hey, this is the new modern era of policing, and we have lots of guys and gals who have degrees, and they've studied psychology and criminology and have went to school, and they don't just have a GED and a few college credits. These guys have studied, and they know human psychology and human behavior so that they can go out. These are 21st century public servants. That's what I've been led to think. They're using all this newfangled technology and policing and all that. You're saying no. This is about, we want people who follow it. Mark Furman, Vietnam veteran. You said they just want people who follow orders. Have I been lied to?
You've been lied to. I was lied to also. When I became a police officer, they were recruiting a lot on college campuses and trying to recruit professional black people because there was supposed to be a kinder and a gentler LAPD. And, I wanted to be a part of that change. And I really thought that they were really looking for black people with degrees and who can make a difference in the community. My first day in academy, my drill instructor looked at me and he said, hey, look, we don't want people like you here in the LAPD because we have enough people like you in Nickerson Gardens. And Nickerson Gardens is a project, a black project in Watts. And so right then and there, exactly how they saw me and how they saw the other blacks in the academy, that we were, they looked at us as people from the hood, gang members and stuff like that. They see black people all, the same way. And so, that was my first experience with, I've been lied to. They're not looking for college grads. They're not looking for educated people. And then if they see one, they don't even know it.
Wow. context of white supremacy, you described incidents that happened when you were in training. Like, this is not, you saying that I've been on the force 5 years or, 10 years, 3 years, anything like that. This is in training where these types of things, where you said Mark Fuhrman is saying, hey, look, come here. Stand over here and let me see how long you can take it. Go snicker with this other white guy. Some people might say, Mr. Bentley, or I guess maybe a two-part question, why on earth did you want to be a member of the LAPD to begin with, and then after you started having some of these instances very early on, why did you stay?
Well, I became a police officer I became a police officer. I was the assistant manager and a loan officer at a bank. It was a long time ago. It was a bank called Security Pacific. And so my parents always, told us that we should work in the neighborhood and better the community. And so I worked at a bank which was near my home on 29th and Crenshaw. The bank was always getting robbed. People were getting robbed in the parking lot. Old people were getting their money taken on the way home. And, the police were always in that bank, always in the bank, always in the parking lot. And as the assistant manager, I was always taking a report, some type of crime report, almost every day. So I got to talk to officers, and I got to meet officers, and they seemed pretty cool, and they all encouraged me to go into the police department. I didn't do it right away. And, as those things went on, I saw that there was a need for police officers because I was in a high crime area, and there was a need for police officers. And what happened at that time was the banks on the East Coast started moving over on the West Coast. So the banks here in California were laying off managers. Managers were the first to go. So I started looking for other jobs, and I went downtown, and I was looking at I was filling out applications, and they had this big giant poster of this black guy, tall black guy with a suit on and a badge, and they were saying this could be your career. I was like, that looks pretty cool. Let me just fill out an application. And one thing led to another, and then the process took probably maybe about 2 years. And I decided, and before that, I never had any negative contact with the police. So I really didn't know how the police were. And I did not hate the police before I became a police officer, but very shortly after becoming a police officer, I couldn't stand police. I hated all of them, even myself.
Well, all righty then. Let's make sure we get a year stamp on this for when, because you said it was kind of a 2-year process. So when did you start this 2-year process to become an officer?
I became a police officer, and I went into the academy in 1989. So my process probably started around 87 or so. And during that time, I got disqualified for having shaving bumps. And that's another thing, too, that, you can, if you go deeper into it, a lot of my classmates that I found when I was in the academy, the black ones, were disqualified for shaving bumps, disqualified for having bad credit. And we all had to get all that stuff fixed before we became a police officer. And it was just a process that was weeding you out before you got in. And that also goes to the question that you asked is, why didn't I quit? The reason I didn't quit, because I went through so much to become a police officer, and I went through so much on my probation, and I knew that they didn't want me there, and so I couldn't give up. Even though I would have liked to quit, I couldn't give up, and I couldn't let them win. So it was interesting, because almost my whole career, I was just trying not to let the department win. I didn't really want to be there, but I couldn't give in and let them win.
Wow. Just a quick side note for folks who have heard the many, many discussions that we've had on neutralizing workplace racism each Friday evening about hair for black people, non-white people in the workplace. Many times that discussion has a very feminine discussion to it or perspective to it, which I can understand. But, man, hair for black males in the workplace is a major problem. We've had retired firefighter talked about the lip beard issue and all of that. Shaving hair in general can be a huge issue for black males. Go ahead, sir.
And I only had like 3 shaving bumps, and what happened was I went for my oral interview, and everyone told me that you have to look like a police officer. So I shaved everything, mustache, beard. I was clean shaven, and so I had my physical probably like several days afterwards, and I didn't shave, and I probably had like 3 bumps. That's all, 3 hair bumps, and I had to go to a specialist. I had to get cleared by a specialist. I had to wait and shave like 6 months and get cleared. And it was just this whole big thing for shaving bumps.
6 months. Oof. All righty. So we go through this whole weeding out process where he's been told, oh, yeah, this is done deliberately to get rid of you all. Bad credit, shaving bumps, whatever it is. Your shoelaces are dirty, anything to get rid of you all. Affirmative action, so they say. You finally get to become an officer right at the beginning of the decade. What a decade to join the LAPD, which is seemingly right before the beating of Rodney King. You said, or this is in your book where you start to talk about some of your experiences one time, the story of a South Central Los Angeles police officer that you were one questioning. You were looking around, folks coming through training and what have you, and like, wow, you already told us, hey, I want to be a police officer because I'm here, I live in this area, I see black people who are constantly having to call the police and all the rest of it. I want to be a black public servant to serve black people in this area. Right on. You said you're looking at some of these other folks, white people, who are coming from Nebraska, Idaho, Wyoming. Incidentally, Mark Furman is from my own Washington state, not the cool part, the eastern part of the state. Why on earth would these white fellas and gals, why would they want to leave eastern Washington where there are no black people, or Wyoming where there are no black people? Why would they want to line up and come to Los Angeles to get a badge and police in a neighborhood full of black people? You said that was a head scratcher for you during training, yes?
It was definitely a head scratcher, and the ironic part about it is we had three divisions where we could request to go to. So all the white officers from the other states, the Midwest, all requested to go to the divisions that were in the black neighborhoods. And I asked them, I said, well, why do you want to go there? And they were like, well, we don't even know where it is. We just heard that that's where all the action is. So police officers consider themselves as hunters of men. And if you're a hunter, you know where the best place to go is and the best place to hunt. And so through the media, everybody knows that with the gang violence and the things that happen in the black neighborhood, that's the best place where you can go and do your hunting of people without any kind of questions being asked or, repercussions of your actions. You can go, it's like the Wild Wild West. So it's advertised in the media where to go. So these officers all want to come to L.A., all want to come to South Central L.A. to where the gangs are so they can, fight and shoot and shoot black gang members. And so it's just widely known. And then the irony is that they sent me to an all-white neighborhood, sent all the whites to the black neighborhoods, and sent the black officers to the all-white neighborhood.
That's interesting. I think, at least for myself, I can grasp why a Mark Furman, incidentally, Vietnam veteran Mark Furman, I can totally understand. I was over here shooting gooks and slant eyes and non-white people and having fun doing it and all that, and their action. Incidentally, I think it's significant that they say they want to go where the action is. They'll use action for this. They can go and shoot black criminals, black gangbangers, presumably. They'll also use the same word for sexual activity, looking for some action. That's interesting. But they send the white officers over to the areas where it's predominantly black residents, black criminals presumably, gangbangers, and then they send the black officers over to the white residents. Now, this is the same LAPD. They wouldn't even allow black officers to arrest white people at one time. Why would they be sending black officers to the white area? Did you have a thought on why they were doing that?
Well, I know why. It's because in West LA division and some of the other white divisions, they sent the older white officers who have retired, in mentally who have, waiting to retire, the ones that are old and racist, they go over to the West LA division and the Valley divisions to stay there until they retire. So what happens is if the officers who are working in South LA are so busy that they're just answering calls back and forth. The officers in the West LA don't have a lot of calls. So what they do is they spend their time trying to weed out the black. They have you doing little things where they can just write you up for everything. They have time to mess with you. Whereas on the other side of town, they don't have time. But in West LA, they had nothing but time, and their whole agenda was to weed you out. These were specific officers who didn't like blacks, didn't like women, didn't like Mexicans, and their whole purpose of being over there was to weed you out, to get you fired, stressed out, and get you fired. And they had all the time to do it, and they had all the backing to do it.
That is, number one, emphasis. You can't be ignorant about white supremacy racism and have that sophisticated of a system. Because it's racism in two different ways. We're sending white officers, a la Mark Fuhrman. We put you in black neighborhoods to do what you do, Rampart or whatever else, however that is manifested. Go over there and have fun. We put the black officers, we know you all are going to be so busy with your nigger knockers and gunning down people and all the rest of it. You won't have time to harass your other black coworkers. So we'll send them over here. They won't have all that. No black gangbangers over here. Got white-collar criminals. Everything is peaceful. You don't have anything to do but harass your black coworkers. Wow. That is what domination, and really that is what a system looks like. You can be paid well with benefits to practice racism in a myriad of different ways. Wow. You wrote in the book, and this is to the first component, so we send the Mark Fuhrmans of the world, we send them to the black neighborhoods we send them to the hood where anyone is fair game. Is that accurate, Mr. Bentley?
That's correct. Anyone is fair game. Now, the thing is, when I wrote the book, it was before cell phones. So the media, the courts, everybody took an officer at their word. There was no other proof. So anything an officer said went. People got arrested for resisting arrest, for battery, and many of them didn't do anything, as we see now on video and on cell phones. So at that time, anything went. Anything an officer said, it goes. And you had some officers, another subject is that gang members get beat and harassed every day, all day long. And, without any recourse, no action. They don't even videotape anything. So that within the department and also within the community, that's not a problem. What you see now is that the police are harassing, shooting, and beating just regular citizens, people on their way to work, people just, your average person, and they're seeing that. And that's where you're starting to see the anger and, all the defund the police is because your average person who hasn't done anything, no criminal record, are the ones that are getting beat.
I remember the legend Johnny L. Cochran Jr., he was on Democracy Now! Shortly after Geronimo Jajaga Pratt was released from prison, and this was right in the midst of Rampart beginning to be released and talked about. And he said, people said, well, fiddlesticks, this is a bunch of nothing. These are just gangsters and gang members and gangbangers. You know, who cares if the police roughed them up or whatever? These folks should be beaten up. And he said, whoa, wait a minute here. Like, number one, are we sure they're even gang members that they're doing this to? And even if they are, what happened to due process? How is it, just whatever? Go out and do whatever you want to. I don't care. They shouldn't be gangsters to begin with. Like, wait a minute. Even with all of that, same thing I say with Randall Sullivan, the problem, even with if they are so-called gangsters, in the system of racism, white supremacy, individuals who are classified as black, frequently that could be enough for it to be a member of a gang. Looked like a gangbanger to me. Like, that will be the justification. It's, well, wait a minute. Is this person a gangster? Like, are you sure? Is it just that they were black and happened to be outside wearing blank color or wearing a specific hat or had on a specific brand of sneakers? Like, the whole justification for it, that's one. We'll get to the Rampart scandal a little bit later on. I guess that's further down the timeline after OJ and all that. One more, I guess, quick one from the book. You talked about your reason, very noble in my opinion, for wanting to be an officer in the first place. You wrote in the book that you were kind of not prepared. You said that a lot of black people, I guess when they found out, like, oh, Mr. Bentley, he's going to be an officer, it was not, oh, man, that's awesome. We need more of you. We're tired of these Mark Furmans beating on us. It was, man, you're a sellout. You've had one line in the book where the guy stopped you and he said, oh, you Rodney King beating punk, get out of here. He said, whoa. I didn't beat Rodney King. He said, I don't care. You're with him, get out of here. Dang, I was not prepared for that at all. Can you kind of talk about how black people perceived you once you got that badge?
Well, it actually started with my own family. My mother, her uncle, he had been arrested by LAPD numerous times, and he used to drink down on Central Avenue, and the police would stop him and take his money all the time. So my mother was really not a fan of the police, and she did not want me to be a police officer. And every morning she would call me and say, hey, don't be a dirty cop like the ones that robbed your Uncle Bubba. Don't be like, she would call me every day and tell me that. And as a police officer, I learned very quickly that I could not tell my family and my friends, the girl I was dating, I could not tell her about what took place at work, because everybody would have an opinion and people were not very happy about it. And I thought that when I transferred over to Southwest Division, which is where I live, I thought people would be happy to see me. They would be happy to see a black officer. And I thought, I was still young and I was very naive. I thought for some reason that they could see or sense the trials and tribulations that I went through as a police officer, that they could see and feel how, I was mistreated by the department and how whites did not want me on the job. So I thought they would treat me differently. And, like I wrote in my book, I was so eager. I was in the car, I was waving to people, and they was waving back with a finger and calling me a Rodney King beating motherfucker. And, they was cursing at me and stuff. And that did a lot to me psychologically, because I started expecting it. And so I became very defensive towards blacks. And when I would go to a call and I would take a report, I would think or assume that that's how they see me. And a lot of times I was kind of distant and standoffish with people I shouldn't have, because they didn't think like that. But I just automatically thought that, they were going to come at me, because, I could be taking a report from somebody and another person would be walking down the street, totally unrelated, and just start cursing at me. Uncle Tom, sell out, just in the past, and then keep on going. So, and then one time I was taking a report, and some guy was walking down the street with his son, and he stopped and said, "You want to know what Uncle Tom looks like? That's one right there. I just want to let you know, son, that's what one looks like." So it was always that constant battle, and as a black police officer, I felt like I never belonged anywhere. I didn't belong on the job because I lived in the area and they thought that I was a gang member. These are officers that I work with. They thought that I was a gang member or a criminal, and then the people in the community saw me as a sellout. So I always felt that, I always had a hard place, like I really just didn't belong. And, psychologically, that just made me not care about anybody. It just kind of turned off all my emotions towards everybody.
Wow. Context of white supremacy. That is brutal to have the child in point. You want to see what a sellout looks like? There. Like, wow. Crushing. It shouldn't laugh, but I mean, wow. That is the system of no name calling. We say that on the program all the time. No name calling. No name calling. Horrible habit we need to break.
And also further too, it's interesting because a lot of officers feel the same way, and they get to the point where a lot of them go in wanting to do it good and wanting to help the black community, but after they go through everything, it's kind of like they have no more goals. Their only goal is to get home and get paid and go drink and get drunk and stuff, but they lose their dedication to the community really quickly.
I can understand how joining such an organization and being treated like that would quickly erode noble intentions. I don't want to miss that either. Your mom, particularly, he said his mother would call him every day and say,
every day,
don't be one of those dirty cops like the ones that robbed your uncle. And this is not an event. He said this happened years ago. This is not something that just happened last month or, the beginning of the year or what have you. Just in my view, when they talk about epigenetics and how when you get terrorized, and that's terrorism. That's not pussyfooted and police brutality. That is terrorism. You have someone in a badge with a gun and is coming and taking things from you. That is terrorism. Now, you have events like that happen, that is lifetime trauma. I can't even imagine for your uncle. This is your mom, and you see the impact where she's calling you every day, and it's going back to that event. Like, how many generations of black people all over the world have those type of events and those type of traumas? And, that's probably one of the more constructive ways of dealing with it, to try to use it as a daily reminder to your offspring, hey, don't you do that. Don't you go out there and be one of those terrorist officers that terrorized your uncle. Generations of police terrorism. Getting back to sellouts.
Also too on that, I think that one of the reasons why she did that is because she could see the change that I was going through, because I heard it a lot from my family members or they would, at dinners and stuff, they would say, you're different. You don't seem the same. You've changed. We can tell you've changed. And I think she saw that probably sooner than everybody else, and she wanted to constantly remind me where I came from and what my goal was and my purpose of being a police officer was.
Black self-respect to your mother. That is spectacular. We talked about that for workplace racism. We talked about how that's so important, especially if you're in a job and it's causing you stress, you're being traumatized. Having people on the job tell you, hey, I'm not here to train you properly. I'm here to get you fired. I don't think you should be here in the first place. Working in that sort of environment might cause you some stress, might impact how you feel and what have you. You might take some stress home with you. Having people around you who can notice that change, like, man, something is different. I don't know what's going on. Are you eating? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you feeling okay? To remind you, this was the reason that you took this job. Are you able to stick to that reason? That is so critically important, as opposed to if you're just isolated, you don't have those people to check on you, and you can just kind of drift off into the abyss and, no one notices really. Kudos to your mother. Black self-respect, so important. Speaking of sellouts, I'm just joking. Speaking of sellouts, Well, actually, can't get to O.J. Simpson. Go in order. The whole, I guess, the beating of Rodney King and then the subsequent trial, you've already told it had such a huge impact. People, you were not there, obviously, didn't participate, and black people are responding to you and saying, you're Rodney King beater. Can you just, after the verdict especially, not guilty, the trial gets moved out to Simi Valley, not guilty, L.A. goes up in flames. You talked about just feeling immense sadness. Again, hey, I grew up here. I live here. I know some of these places that are on fire. Like, this is nothing to celebrate. Just can you talk about your feelings once the riots happened and how that impacted your ability to police?
Well, when I first saw the Rodney King beating on television, I was a rookie and I watched it. I was actually at work when I saw it. And before I became a police officer, I have relatives that are gang members, and some of the people I went to high school with were gang members. And they used to talk about how the police would beat them up and, how the police stopped them and hit them with flashlights and stuff like that. But in my mind, I envisioned maybe the police grabbing them. When they say they got beat up, I thought maybe they got grabbed, maybe shook, or I don't know, like a little soft tap or something. I didn't really understand what they were saying when they said they got beat up by the police. And so when I saw the Rodney King beating, I was like, damn, he getting beat, right? And it was a shock to me because that was the first time I've ever seen anything like that. I had heard stories, but I just couldn't put it into context. And so when I saw that, I was like, man, that is just ridiculous. So shortly after that, I got my transfer. I did finished my probation, and I went to Southwest Division. I think it was like the second day there was a pursuit, and I did the backup at the pursuit. And what I saw at the end of that pursuit made Rodney King beating on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst. The Rodney King beating was probably like a 4 compared to the beatings that I saw when I was in Southwest Division. The Rodney King beating on a scale of 1 to 10 was like a 4. People in my division, they were taking, after pursuits, they had like brain matter coming out their head, people with broken arms, eye sockets. I mean, it was just, it was horrible. And going back to my training, told me that if you ever get into an altercation with somebody, you have a duty to make an example out of them. And so what you need to do is make sure they're beaten so badly that they're booked in the county jail hospital ward. And all rookies were told that at that time. I don't know what they're being told now, but that was the mind frame. And so I saw people that they were just, the Rodney King beating was nothing. Really nothing. I mean, they hit Rodney King with batons on his legs, shoulders, some on his head and stuff. But what I saw, people in South L.A., they were using the metal flashlights and hitting people just directly on the head. And, they justified it. They justified it by their police reports, and we can talk about that later. But people think that police officers are ignorant, like what you mentioned, GED, no education. But police officers are educated just almost like brain surgeons to circumvent your civil rights. They can get away with almost anything by writing it in a report. They fear for their life. They can justify anything, any type of use of force. They can any type of detention, any type of arrest. They have the experience and the education by the department to circumvent anybody's civil rights. And they're like geniuses at doing it. And it's a recipe that's been going on it's been passed down for generations. And it always works. It's like the Colonel's KFC secret recipe that's good every single time. That's what police officers pass down on how to write things to say to get around your civil rights.
Wow. Context of white supremacy. O.J. Simpson is coming, but I just for emphasis, we had Norm Stamper as a guest on the program many times. He was a police officer in Southern California, San Diego, and former chief of police here in Seattle. And he talked about some of the same things in terms of being able to skirt constitutional rights if you want to make an arrest and that sort of thing. Particularly, he talked about so frequently, especially if you're in a vehicle, if you're out and about, man, do not agree to searches of your vehicle or your person. He talked about that as a big one. He's like, it's so easy to, oh, you don't mind if I poke around a little bit, and then they find something or whatever. Just do not agree, consent to searches of your vehicle, your person, your residence without a warrant. In fact, we talked to several folks who emphasized that, put it in bold-faced print, that's so important. You're not saying it with an attitude and cursing anyone out. Sir, ma'am, I know you're doing your job, but I do not consent to searches of my person, my property, my vehicle, my house, without a warrant. I use that myself successfully. I've used it repeatedly myself. It's been successful every time, but that's so critical. He said, trained to skirt your constitutional rights to your death. That's Bill Cosby. They said that. That's the way that they talked about that. They said that's not a technicality, that you have a constitutional right not to self-incriminate. And they violated that to say, hey, if you sit down and talk to us, this is a civil trial, we'll never prosecute you criminally. And then they went back on their word and lied about it. That's why he got freed right there.
Well, even if you don't consent to have your vehicle searched, there are certain things that police officers can lie about and say and still have a legal reason to search your car. What we used to do is we would always say that we saw someone when they saw us, that they had an object in their hand and they put it under their seat. And based on our experience, that people hide guns under their seat. Now that doesn't give you the probable cause or reasonable suspicion to search their trunk and everything, but that gives you the reasonable suspicion to search that area. And officers come up with all kinds of things. They'll lie and say they smell something, or there are a lot of ways. In fact, we used to go in roll call and discuss those things every single day. And our watch commander had a big clipboard, and in that clipboard he had a list of crime reports. In those crime reports, he got all the crime reports with vague descriptions. The male black, 5'5" to 6'5", white T-shirt, blue jeans, bald head. He had like about 60 crime reports that he would collect every day with a general description. So when a police officer pulls you over and they say, hey, look, we stopped you because you fit the description. You know in your mind that you don't fit no description. But I promise you, by the time you get to the police station, you will fit a description in that clipboard. And that's one of the things that, took place when I was a police officer.
Context of white supremacy, Mr. Brian S. Bentley, vague descriptions where you will have some discretion. It was a black male, baggy pants, T-shirt, medium build. Like, oh, really? That'll fit any number of 1,000 folks? Oh, okay. Right on. Go, O.J. Simpson, bring him in too.
Yeah, and the running joke in roll call was that they would read off these descriptions and everybody would turn and look at me and say, why do you keep robbing people before you come to work? They thought that was like real funny. And in first, I thought it was kind of funny, but until I was off duty and I would see a patrol car driving by, and I'm thinking, dang, I fit a description. So it wasn't funny then, but at first it was funny. But that was like a running joke in roll call.
Total system of white supremacy racism. Even the jokes, in my view, that is a racist joke. black people are criminalized. Like, I'm a fellow officer. I'm here to protect and serve, and it's every day. Why do you keep robbing people, Mr. Bentley? Man, every day you're robbing. Why are you mugging people every day? Yes. Black people rob and mug all the time. Yes, and then he said it was less funny when, oh, wait a minute, they are looking at me like I really do fit the, oh, man. Woo. And that's St. Louis right now. In fact, that's many times over and over. Brian Lair, he was a guest on our program, Dick Lair, way back in 2009 in Boston, not L.A., I know, but his book, The Fence, where white officers, one of their black colleagues, they were chasing a suspect. It was dark, and they say they got confused, and they saw the black guy, didn't recognize him or whatever, beat him unconscious and bloody until they recognized, like, oh, whoops, that's our partner. And then they left him there. That was one. And then St. Louis right now, if we want to go current, where two white officers beat a black, I think he was an undercover officer, like Kevin Gaines type of thing, where he wasn't in uniform, beat him down, all that, and whoops, this is one of ours, like regular. You had better have that badge, like prominent, out, your work ID, license, everything. Safety wallet that's orange. Don't let them have to, wait a minute, I got to reach for, I couldn't even imagine being Frank Liga is a black person, and you just get to hop out, you're not in uniform, and you're not shot 50 times. Anyway, we'll get to that later. But, man, trained to evade your civil rights. Now, speaking of Frank Liga and training, now, Orenthal James Simpson. So he's arrested in 94. You said you guarded his residence during the civil trial and actually got a chance to talk to him and all that, which is, fascinating to say the least. For the criminal trial aspect, in Randall Sullivan's Labyrinth, he says that the criminal Simpson trial in 95, that had a huge impact on policing for about 1 million different reasons, Mark Furman and all that. He said that black officers who felt O.J. Simpson was innocent, that upset a lot of the white officers, and then white officers who thought he was guilty, that upset the black officers. Then the Furman tape comes out and all that. Do you remember the atmosphere amongst other officers during the criminal trial in 95?
I do. I definitely was there during that time, and I remember the atmosphere. And what's interesting is that the officers that I worked with, we were I was in a parking lot of a 7-Eleven, and I was with a sergeant and a number of officers, and I was the only black officer there, and there was probably like about 8 of us there. And they were upset. But the reason they were upset is because Mark Furman lied and said he never called anybody a nigger. And they said he missed his opportunity to be a hero. All he had to say was, yes, I did it. I was angry. I didn't really mean it. But they were upset because he lied about it. And see, a lot of my partners, they didn't consider themselves racist, but they spent a lot of time trying to explain why they called somebody a nigger. It was always because they were just like super angry and they didn't mean it. And they spent a lot of time trying to convince me and other black officers that just because you say it doesn't mean that you're a racist. And they were upset because Mark Furman did not help them, and he did not explain why he did it. And, he didn't like let the world know that I'm a good cop, but I just happened to say it, So they were upset by that aspect.
Were they, like we heard the clip from City of Lies, they said, hey, there were a lot of good cops. I don't know if they were talking about like Phil Van Natter and Tom Lang. I don't know if they were talking about them or some of these other detectives who they said, hey, these guys did really good work. They weren't racist, and this stupid O.J. trial and that no count Johnny Cochran, they're going there and played the race card, and they got lucky this happened after the Rodney King beating and riots and all that nonsense where they got smeared. We read Jeffrey Toobin's book, which, by the way, is way biased against Mr. Simpson, is of the opinion that he did commit these crimes. Man, these guys, Furman et al., Lang, Van Natter, they lied on the search warrant. They lied about Mr. Simpson vanishing and going out of town surprisingly all of a sudden, which wasn't true at all. His trip to Chicago was planned months in advance. They lied about hopping over the fence the night that they went on to the Simpson estate and found the glove. Like, there were lots and lots of... Oh, go ahead, sir.
The thing is, with the people that I worked with, the white cops that I worked with, is that they all agreed that the LAPD procedures were wrong, and that a lot of them believed that there wasn't even enough evidence to actually have a trial. But they also, which enlightened me, is that it's possible to frame a guilty person, and that's their belief, is that guilty people get framed all the time. They don't have enough evidence, so cops manufacture stuff to get people convicted that are guilty. And that's the frame of mind that they had. Their frame of mind is that guilty people get framed. Just because you get framed doesn't mean that you're not guilty.
Man, now I would be curious. Now, is that attitude unilateral? Hey, oh well, guilty people get framed. Like, did they take that position when the presumed guilty person? I thought you were supposed to be, one of the constitutional rights I thought is that you are presumed innocent. Maybe I'm ignorant. I thought it was not supposed to be that we're presuming we got a guilty fella here or guilty female. I thought it was supposed to be you are presumed innocent until...
Well, I wrote a book. Second book is called Honor Without Integrity. I don't know if you read that one, but Honor Without Integrity is a book that I wrote, and it's fiction. It's a short book. It's fiction, and the reason I made it fiction is because I talk about things in detail that are illegal that police officers do. During the O.J. Simpson trial, you heard Johnny Cochran talk about the term test-a-lie, which is a combination of testifying and lying. And that's something that officers do all the time. So what we would do is, for instance, if you arrested somebody with a gun in a dark alley, you know that if you have an attorney like Johnny Cochran, they're going to say, how could you possibly see a gun in a dark alley? So what you do is you take that arrest and take it out of that alley, and you put it in front of an address where there's a street light, under street light. So you actually arrested a person in a dark alley. You don't know what was on the ground, before you got there. And you put it under a street light where you say, I arrested this person and he was in front of this address. And so you eliminate all the questions that you think somebody like Johnny Cochran would ask. You stop gang members and they're just walking down the street. You search them. They have on like 3 pair of pants, and you unzip the first layer, the second layer, the third layer. You take off their first jacket, their second jacket, and deep down in their shorts you find a revolver. But when you make that arrest and you write that arrest report, you write that the guy was walking down the street with a gun in his hand. And so, that guy did have the gun, but you changed it. You did test-a-lie. And, those are the things I wrote about in my second book called Honor Without Integrity.
Honor Without Integrity. Written multiple books, one time as well. Mr. Brian S. Bentley, former member of the LAPD. See, now that's detailed deception, where you get to go and change things around. And, well, we'll just put out, we didn't arrest him in the dark alley. We arrested him out here on the brightly lit street where everyone can see that, of course, he had a gun and crack cocaine and all the rest of it. Real quickly, people think that police officers learn this stuff in the academy. I learned about the report writing and how you can just make reports better, embellish them, by a prosecutor. Prosecutors will tell you, if you had done this, because I wrote in one time, the first time that I arrested somebody with a gun, I wrote that I saw this person, they looked at me, and they dropped it, and I heard a hard metal object hit the ground, and I looked, and it was a gun. And the prosecutor said, you can't say that. You need to change that and say you saw him drop the gun. And I said, but I didn't see him drop it. I just heard something. And she was like, well, it could have been a bottle. It could have been a can. It could have been, something else. You can't say that you heard it. You got to definitively say you saw it. And I wouldn't change my report. I said I would not change it because I did not see him.
I'm telling you exactly what happened. And every time you go to court, a prosecutor will look over your report and ask you, can you change this? Can you reword this? And, when you testify, can you just say something a little different? And so it's not the police officers that teach officers how to lie. It's the prosecutors, because they want to win their case so badly.
Words are important. Gil Garcetti. Remember how they said they had to mollycoddle Mark Fuhrman, make sure he was saying the correct thing on the stand? I didn't even know what that meant. I had to look that one up. What does mollycoddle mean? So you said that you had to guard O.J. Simpson's house during the civil trial, which is after the acquittal, and white people across the world are furious. Did your opinion change, if you had one, about his guilt or innocence in the criminal trial? Did your opinion change at all from before you actually got to have some time chatting it up with him, or did it stay the same?
My opinion changed after I met him. I thought that he was probably innocent before, and I knew the LAPD was wrong, and I didn't think that he even should have went to trial. But after I met him, my opinion changed because, they had tour buses coming by, and we had the whole area blocked off for maybe like almost a half a mile. You couldn't get to his house for almost a half a mile. It was all blocked off. But he would come out every hour, on the hour, and walk down the street, sign autographs, take pictures with blondes, and he just had a ball. And he would do it every hour. I mean, like clock miss an hour. And it just seemed like he had a great time signing stuff, taking pictures. And then, he invited me in his house, wanted me to, he said he would fix me lunch. But prior to being posted there, I was told, don't say anything. Don't even look at him. Don't say anything. But he was just very, he was great. He was really just a nice guy. And then when I shook his hand, his hands were so big, I was like, man, they're lucky the Browns wasn't having a family reunion, because he could have killed everybody. I mean, that dude was big and he was strong, and just his mannerism and just how he was just absorbing all the attention made me think like, dang, this dude, this ain't right. And so I did change my opinion by working there when I saw him.
Now, that's interesting, just based on, I guess, his his enjoyment of all this attention, having all these looky-loos coming by his house, and he could do all these autographs and get some of the fame and fortune that he had before all of the ugliness, I guess, from 1994, that made you think, wow, something doesn't seem right about this. Him soaking all this in and being in all this. Was the civil trial still going on at that point?
Yes, the civil trial was still going on. And when he came back from the trial, he would come there, and because the buses, I mean, these are like real like tour buses with 80, 90 people on it, and they were coming all night long. And he would come out there all night long too. He would take a little break, and he'd come out there and sign autographs, and he did it like nonstop until they stopped. And it was definitely during the trial.
Wacky. When you changed your opinion, did you process like, how would he have done all this in the time allotted, like going over the timeline and all that? Did you ponder any of that, or just?
Well, I knew some of the people that I knew the officer who went to the crime scene, the one who arrested him, and I knew a lot of the officers, and I knew a lot of the desk officers. So the timeline was not right. The timeline, they talk about the barking dog. Some neighbors had called about a barking dog earlier, and they had called the desk, and they didn't respond. They just said, okay, we'll log it, we'll send somebody out, and they didn't do it. It wasn't until they got several calls that one of the desk officers said, well, maybe I better actually send somebody out there. Maybe I better transfer them to 911. So many calls. And that was probably like about an hour. They didn't talk about that, and the department didn't talk about that. and the officers who were involved didn't want to talk about that because they messed up. But they were getting calls of barking dogs earlier. So the timeline was longer, and they just didn't. When they start getting a bunch of them, repeatedly, then they decided to connect the people and have a call dispatch. So the timeline was not right. And, there was a lot of things that are not right. I mean, if you really want to talk about conspiracies and questioning the dots and connecting the dots and stuff, David Mack, who was the one who was accused of murdering Biggie, that was his area. He was the senior lead officer when of that area that Nicole Brown was killed. That was his area, and he worked that day, and he worked that night, and he patrolled that area that night. So I mean, and that's one of the things they never brought up either. So I mean, man, there's so many directions that you can go in, and everything was not covered in the media.
Context of white supremacy. I don't know if he's the same size as O.J. Simpson, but wow, there was a black male seen in the neighborhood that night. Wow, that is crazy. Let's see if we can nab a question or two, and then I guess from where we are on the timeline to get to the Gaines shooting, as well as what happened with Notorious B.I.G. and Ennis Cosby, things that happened kind of later on in the decade that's relevant to all of these other cases, as well as, I don't know if you got a chance to see Mr. Sullivan's book as well, City of Lies, that nonsense also. The number, folks, if you have a question for author, former LAPD officer Brian S. Bentley, the number is 720-716-7300, the code 564-943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Let's see, we'll get a question. Retired firefighter in Florida, previously mentioned, got in trouble for those lip beards in the fire department in South Florida. Retired firefighter, if you have a question for Mr. Bentley, you should be with us, sir. Let's see.
Greetings, Gus, and greetings to the guests. I was going to ask a question that I think you already asked the guest, and I think he answered somewhat the question. What I was going to ask is, being that you had the idea in mind of becoming a law enforcement official, and working and staying in the same neighborhood, my question was going to be to give a report on how you navigated through that process over a certain amount of years, and just wondered, when you did answer the question, did you get everything out that you wanted to say on that subject? Or is it anything else that we can hear on as far as what was your code to be able to function on a daily basis as an law enforcement official, working and residing in the same area, basically around other non-white black people?
We're living in the area that you patrol adds stress. Like during the riots, a lot of my partners, their mentality was, why should we be here? Let them burn their own neighborhood, let them burn their own stores. For me, the riots was personal. The stores that were being looted and burned were the stores that I shopped at. The cleaners where they were just taking clothes out of the cleaners. My clothes were at that cleaners. So everything, my post office, the bank that I worked at, was broken into and looted. And so everything was personal. And then when you live in the neighborhood that you patrol, it's a good thing because you take your job seriously. I never took a day off. Some officers just, they were there just to get paid. But for me, it was my duty to always patrol my street and my neighborhood specifically, and I never took a day off. But the thing is I never took a day off psychologically or any time off psychologically, because every time I drove down the street, every alley that I drove past had a story. Someone got raped in that alley. Every business that I went to, I had a story where I took a crime report. And, I became really paranoid. And I wrote in my book one time that I was so paranoid that when I went into the bathroom, I took my gun with me, kept my gun on the floor when I was in the bathroom because, I was so paranoid that somebody would find out where I lived and that, somebody would try to retaliate. And, there's added stress to it. But ironically, nobody even paid any attention to me. There were times where I went to a call, somebody would threaten me and say, next time I see you, I'm going to get you. And then I would run into that person like the next day at the gas station or at Taco Bell or something like that, and they wouldn't even recognize me. It's just you. And then at that point, you realize that people really don't see you. They just see the uniform. And they really don't, they really don't pay attention to you. And I used to run into people all the time. And I wrote in my book one time that, because I was a fast food junkie, that I always ate at Taco Bell. And every time I was at Taco Bell, I always would run into gang members, always. And, none of them ever paid no attention to me. They just went about their business, and nobody knew that I was a police officer. And I had, perfected the art of not looking like a police officer. Police officers have a certain way. They wear certain clothes, a white T-shirt, the shirt over it, button-down shirt, with the jeans, the cowboy boots, and I made it a point not to look like that or act like that. And nobody ever called me out on it, And so, those are just paranoias that I have, and living and working in your community does definitely add different stress to the job.
I think I understand you.
I want to mention too. And one other thing too is when you call off sick, you can because you're still on the payroll. Please, the sergeants and stuff can do a welfare check and come by and check on you. The officers that live like 60 miles away, 70 miles away, they never had anybody check on them because I lived in the division. Every single time I called off sick, a sergeant came to my house to check on me to see if I was really sick. And I would be in Vegas.
Two more questions real quick. Did you work through full retirement, or are you still working on the job?
I was fired after my first book. After my first book, I went through an extensive investigation. They interviewed me for like 14 hours. I had over 300 allegations, and what's interesting about it is the allegations were for not reporting misconduct. So, for instance, I wrote in my book that my training officer told me that the only reason that we have female cops is so that they can give male cops oral sex in between radio calls.
Wow.
So I wrote stuff like that. And that became an allegation of misconduct because I didn't report it 7 years prior. And so everything I wrote in my book became an allegation of misconduct for not reporting it. And so what happened was I went to a trial board, and my trial board lasted 10 months. And that was 10 months. You always hear about police officers being relieved of duty with pay. I was relieved of duty without pay for 10 months. And so by that time, I knew I was going to write another book, and I just never came back. I just never finished the trial board. And I just went about my business and continued to write. So I was fired for job abandonment.
Okay. Last, there are some similarities that I've heard through the interview between what you did as a law enforcement and my time on the fire department, especially with white people. Would you say that another reason why they work in areas where non-white black people are at is because the majority of the most terrible calls are in those areas, and also out of that you get awards and decorations for it. So you would advance promotion-wise, and or just plain getting glory for working in that area. You'll always, there'll always be some matter of excitement based on the seriousness of the cause. Would that be correct?
That's correct, and that's a good point, because with LAPD, in order to promote, you have to show that you've worked in a busy division and that you've worked in a high crime area. So a lot of the people that come over, really, some of them really don't even want to do anything. And I've had partners who, before we go out, would tell me, say, hey, look, I want to take the sergeant's test. I want to promote. So I don't want any personnel complaints. So I don't want to do anything. I don't want to stop any gang members. I only want to go to calls and take my time, because the only reason I'm here is just so it looks good in my personnel file that I worked in a busy division. When I try to promote, I don't want to do anything. And so a lot of people that come through just as a promotional tool. And to answer your question, a lot of them just passing through, and they really don't. People think that everybody in South LA are gunfighters and want to, do a lot of crime fighting, but some people just use it as a tool to promote.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Much obliged, retired firefighter. Let's see. Our Bay Area mom, she is north of Mr. Bentley in Southern California. Bay Area mom should be with us as well.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. Greetings to you and the people on the line. I'd like to ask the guest a question. How often, just from your recollection, did the LAPD have shootouts with civilians?
That's a good question. We always hear about police officers shooting unarmed people, but we don't. What the public doesn't hear is how many times the police officers shoot at people and miss, or how many times they shoot at people and hit somebody in the foot, or the finger, or just miss them totally and shoot some buildings or something. But police officers shoot at people a lot, and a lot of times they're unarmed and they miss a lot. And those things don't make the news and don't make the media. And people would really be alarmed if they knew how many times police officers shoot at people and try to kill people and miss. So it happens a lot.
If they meet their mark and successfully kill whomever they came to shoot out with, is it likely that they can convince attorneys in the local area or attorneys in the Los Angeles area not to take the case?
As I mentioned earlier, police officers are great at report writing. They're experts at going around your civil rights, and they can justify almost anything. And all they have to do is say the phrase, they fear for their life, you made a hand gesture, you reached in your pocket, you didn't comply. There are so many things they could say that justify them shooting. And they're great at it. In the DA's office, if they don't have a clear-cut case, they will not prosecute, because it's very difficult to prosecute a police officer and get a win. And the prosecutors, they have records, and they want to go and have records and leave the prosecution office and get a job in the private industry and be some kind of big-time lawyer. And they don't want a losing case. They don't want to lose cases. They want a winning record. So they don't bother with stuff that they think they're going to lose. And so when you try to prosecute a police officer, there's a good chance that you're going to lose the case, and prosecutors don't want that.
Got it. Thank you for answering my questions, and thank you for taking my call. And I'll mute my line. Have a good evening.
You too.
Yes, ma'am. Bay Area mom. Let's see. Rachel in New York, vegan mommy. If you have questions for Mr. Bentley, proceed.
Hi. Good night to all. Good night. Good evening to Gus and to the callers and to the guests. My question is, what can Black people do to protect themselves from enforcement officers?
Well, right now, the most important thing is to have witnesses and to be able to, in some form, to videotape. Videotape has been the best ally that we've had. And, without videotape, probably none of these police officers would be convicted. And so, I would say the best thing is, there's a lot of equipment that you go after your car, but you should have some type of either a witness or some type of camera to help document, what your stop in dealing with the police.
That's my only question. Thank you so much.
Short and to the point. Much obliged. Rachel in New York. Let's see. We'll stick with yes, sir.
Let me add one other thing, too. I always hear people say that you should know your rights, and that's one of the reasons I didn't mention it is because you should know your rights. But as a police officer, I've never met anyone who could protect their rights. Knowing your rights and protecting them is two different things. I've never come across anybody who was able to protect their rights when they're out in the field dealing with a police officer at night. So that's one of the reasons why I didn't say know your rights.
Understood. Being confronted with an armed Mark Furman who has backup at the ready. Different story entirely. Let's see. Sticking Big Apple. Thomas in New York. Do you have a question for Mr. Bentley?
Yes, good evening, Gus. Good evening, Mr. Bentley. Greetings. I had a few questions. Yes, sir. In the 90s, in the early 90s, the murders in New York City was in the 2000s. The murders in Los Angeles was in the 1000s. The record-breaking numbers in both murders and crimes in both cities. We got a pro-police mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, who commissioned unconstitutional practices like stop and frisk and CompStat, and the murders and crime went down. What was used in Los Angeles? Because it seemed like around the same time you guys had the same trend.
We did. At one point, L.A. was the murder capital of the world. We did. Our chief, who was Daryl Gates, was very famous. He tried a lot of things. We had one thing that was called Operation Hammer, and where they made all the police officers a mandatory work day, and they all went into certain neighborhoods, and they just flooded the neighborhoods. They stopped people for everything. For loitering, bubble gum wrappers, just everything. They just harassed everybody, broke tickets, and they did that a number of times. But I don't think that was effective. But that was one of the things that they tried. We established several specialized units. I was part of a specialized unit, and we went to all the hot spots, and we had target certain people that we were going after. And I just think that it was, one thing about police officers is that everybody who wears a uniform everybody is not the same. So some people don't have the goals that other officers have, and they're just there. But we were able to find officers, and at that time we had a lot of black officers, and they had a lot of black officers in the specialized unit that grew up in L.A. and who have family members in L.A. They had ties to L.A. And at that time, we had the most black officers on the department than we ever did. And they were in the black community, and we were all working hard and trying to talk to people. We had people who would give us information, and we were really putting in work in a positive way. And I think that that was the key at that time, is that we had all these black officers and the new officers, young officers in the community, and actually trying to curb the crime. And we had the trust of the community, and people were giving us information. You'll find, LAPD has maybe 10,000 officers, and probably maybe 6,000 of them are just waiting to retire. They're not doing anything. They're just sitting at the desk and driving around avoiding calls. So all the officers aren't aggressive and don't want to make a difference and don't want to make a change. And I think the key to success was finding these officers, putting them in a special unit, and having them go out and do the work.
Okay, thank you, sir. My next question was based off of the technology, facial recognition. We had a robot dog here in New York. I saw where they're going to put the night scope robots out in some city, aerial drones, predictive policing, things like that. What new techniques or technology are you familiar with or have apprehensive of that the police is instituting?
Well, LAPD they have drones. They have cameras that they've been mounting on high crime areas. And those are primarily the new two technologies that they're using are the drones that they have and the cameras that they're putting up. That sounds good, but for some reason, the homicide rate is still climbing, and it's not working. I don't think new technology is the answer. I think that it's putting people on the ground, putting foot patrols, and having people out there, having officers out there to meet people. Because, realistically, the only way what's going on in the neighborhood is if the residents tell you what's going on. You can drive around all you want. You can have a drone. You can have cameras. But people who are doing dirt will always find a way to get around it. And the only way that you get your information is from the residents. I mentioned several times that I lived in my community. And the information I got, I usually got it from people at the grocery store, little old ladies in line, to be talking about how bad the neighborhood is. And I would introduce myself and, tell them I'm a police officer, I patrol that area. And they would tell me everything. And that's really the only way that you can effectively fight crime, is to have people from the community in the neighborhood give you information.
Okay, yes, my last question is, we have the Atiana Jefferson trial coming soon, I think in August. She was shot inside her home. She had a handgun in her possession. She was shot by a police officer who was outside her home, and he didn't park in front of her home with the lights on. What do you think they're going to use to justify this shooting?
Police officers can always justify a shooting just based on what has happened in the past. They'll probably use some other case study about what happened in some other town, what other city. They have a lot of stuff to draw on that, based on that they had reason to shoot. They'll say that they, of course, they fear for their life. But in that case, it seems pretty open and shut that something should happen to the officer, that the officer was negligent. But we always, we can't really hang our hat and say, oh, it's just obvious, because one of the things that people don't understand is that when you're fighting law enforcement, you're not just fighting the police department. You're fighting all the resources. They have attorneys that go to Harvard, they go to law school, and that's their job. And you're fighting all the resources of that city. So it's very difficult to win. And, they can just pull out all the resources. So I'm sure by the time they meet with the city attorneys and everybody that they'll come up with a reason. And you'll find a lot of officers that the story will change when it gets towards the trial. Initially they'll say it was this, and then when the trial comes, it'll be 3 other reasons that they fired the gun.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Gus.
You're welcome.
Much obliged, Thomas in New York. Let's see, the caller, Chocolate City 5640. 5640. Do you have a question for Mr. Bentley?
Hi, how are you, Gus? Thank you to the guest for being on the show. I wanted to know if when you were a police officer, was the N-word the only racial slur that the white police officers would use? Would they also use other racial slurs?
Well, I didn't hear anybody say anything in front of me, but I've had other officers, white officers, tell me about some of the things that little acronyms they would use. One of the things is what I've heard is that they would talk to people and they would say, "Oh, you know what? You're just so much fun. You're so much fun." And they would say that because fun, F-U-N, stood for effed up nigger. And so they would laugh, and that was their thing, and people didn't know. And they would say, "Oh, yeah, you're fun. Yeah, that person's fun." And that's what, they would smile and say, they're fun. And that was the acronym. That was the only thing I knew, but from what I understand, it's a bunch of them. And, that's really clever because that's some stuff I didn't even figure out. And I've heard people say that. I've heard officers say that before, and I didn't even know that they were, being racist about it.
Mm-hmm. And were you still employed as a police officer when the Chris Dorner situation arose, and what was your view of that?
I was not a police officer when Christopher Dorner went on his rampage, but during that whole incident, I got a lot of attention from the media. I was on CNN because the things that he wrote about in his manifesto were similar to things that I wrote about in my book one time. And it was almost like he had rewritten it. And he wrote about some of the same issues that I wrote about training officers and how the code of silence and the blue line, how you can't the reason he was fired is because he turned in his training officer. And those are things that I wrote about, years prior to his rampage. And so, I did a lot of appearances on TV and radio after that because there were so many similarities from my book to his manifesto. And the things that he wrote about, I don't condone his murder spree, but all the things he wrote about were he talked about the racism, and he talked about how LAPD wants to